This flying boat was built in higher numbers than any other during World War II, and it was in production for 10 years. Though it was actually considered obsolete even before the war broke out, many of them stayed in service for years after it ended, and some of them are still flying up to this day. An iconic vehicle of World War II was the Consolidated PBY Catalina. So let's see the history of this aircraft today. The origins of this aircraft reach back well before World War II, to the late 1920s. The Consolidated company at that time was already an established supplier of several different planes for the US Army and Navy, with designs like the PT-1 trainer. But they were determined to break into the market of the larger multi-engine designs as well, as the Army introduced several specifications for new bombers and other type of aircraft at that time. To boost their chances, Consolidated hired Isaac McLean-Ledon in 1927, who was an experienced designer of multi-engined aircraft, and they used his expertise in their upcoming designs. As it turned out, hiring him was a very good idea. At Consolidated, he was first involved in the S-37 biplane, which was a joint venture between Consolidated and Sikorsky. This biplane bomber was their offer for the 1927 competition. Though it lost out to its competitors, it provided valuable experience for the company and the design team. The next aircraft a year later was the first step in an evolution that eventually led to the PBY Catalina. The XPY-1 Admiral was a design developed by the Navy and circulated to several aviation companies to place offers on building the prototype. Consolidated won this competition in February 1928. They spent most of the year developing techniques needed to build the new aircraft, and the prototype was finished in December the same year. The test flights went smoothly, and in June 1929 the Navy requested bids from manufacturers for the production of the type. Though Consolidated built the prototype, the production order in the end was awarded to the Martin Company, as their bid was considerably lower than the Consolidated one, which included their engineering costs for the prototype development. So this type entered production as Martin P3M. Consolidated, however, used the experience gathered and developed a commercial flying boat based on the design. This was the Commodore passenger flying boat. Ledon's team also developed a new design from the previous XPY-1, which was a considerable upgrade over the previous version, using many features from the Commodore design as well, like the closed cockpit. This was the P2Y-1, which had a predicted range of around 3,000 miles. The Navy approved the new design and awarded a prototype contract to Consolidated in May 1931. This plane was powered by two 575 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engines, and on the first flight test it was even tested with a third engine mounted in the center, but that was quickly removed as the three-engine configuration didn't show significant improvements over the twin-engine variant. Though the first flight of the P2Y-1 only happened in March 1932, the Navy already ordered 23 units of the type in July 1931. But even before deliveries of this flying boat were finished, in mid-1932 the Navy already issued new specifications for its successor. The specifications asked for 3,000 miles of range, 100 miles an hour cruise speed, and a maximum weight of 25,000 pounds. The new designs also had to feature the new Pratt & Whitney XR1830 engines. Ledon and his team designed an entirely new plane for these specifications, using the experiences gathered on the former flying boats. And this was the XP3Y-1, the design that later became the PBY. The Navy, after reviewing the proposal, awarded a contract to Consolidated to build a prototype in October 1933. The main competitor of the Consolidated plane was the Douglas XP3D. Douglas actually received a prototype contract months before Consolidated, and their plane flew in February 1935, more than a month before the XP3Y-1. The first flight for the Consolidated design happened in March 1935. The first tests were successful, but the plane had problems with directional stability and controls. As a result of the instability, the bombing trials in May and June were unsatisfactory. Consolidated modified the rudder to try to fix these problems, but the new design required very high forces to operate and didn't actually fix the stability issues. At the end of July, the prototype was heavily damaged on landing, but luckily the bulkheads held, so the plane was towed back and repaired. At the end of testing, the final report included several recommended changes: improve the waist gunner positions, create a new rear gun position, improve the bomb load, improve the bow gun position, and most importantly, modify the rudder to fix the instability and control issues. Both the Consolidated XP3Y1 and the Douglas XP3D passed the test successfully, and they showed very similar performance, so the decision came down to the final factor, the price of the planes. While Douglas priced their design at $110,000 for each aircraft, the Consolidated offer with a unit price of just $90,000 was considerably lower. So the Navy chose the Consolidated design, and the contract was signed for 60 aircraft. The tail on the aircraft was reworked again, and these modifications made the stability issues acceptable, but it was still not the final fix. After Consolidated implemented the required modifications, the plane was redesignated to XPBY-1. The plane made a final demonstration flight in May 1936, and the first production variant started to arrive to the units in October the same year. But even before that, the Navy already issued another contract to Consolidated for 50 of the PBY-2 variants. And this would be a good time to go over the variants and their distinctive features. The P3Y1 was the early prototype. The XPBY-1 was the modified variant that gone into production as PBY-1. It used two 900 horsepower engines. The PBY-2 was basically similar to the PBY-1 with small improvements. The PBY-3 used stronger 1000 horsepower engines. The PBY-4 had even stronger 1050 horsepower engines, and is the only variant that was built with spinners on the propellers. The next PBY-5 was a bigger redesign. It introduced the bulges on the waist gunner positions, a new tail, and 1200 horsepower engines. The PBY-5A was an amphibian version, featuring retractable wheels. The PBN-1 was a major redesign by the Naval Aircraft Factory. It had a longer nose, a redesigned bottom fuselage, and a redesigned taller vertical stabilizer. The deliveries of the PBN-1 started in 1943, but almost all of these variants were supplied to the Soviet Union. The PBY-6A was similar to the 5A, but featured a new tail, the one from the revised PBN model. It also featured radar and a new bolt turret with twin 50 caliber machine guns in the nose. The PB-2B1 was a PBY-5 variant built by Boeing. The PB-2B2 was similar to the PB-2B1, but used a taller new tail from the PBN design. The PBY was 63 feet 10.5 inches long, with a wingspan of 104 feet. It had an empty weight of 20,910 pounds and a maximum takeoff weight of 35,420 pounds. The plane was powered by two Pratt & Whitney R1830 radial engines, producing 1200 horsepower each. With these engines, it could reach a top speed of 196 miles an hour, a cruise speed of 125 miles an hour, and a range of 2,500 miles. Its service ceiling was 15,800 feet. The plane's defensive armament consisted of 3 30 caliber and 2 50 caliber machine guns, and it could carry up to 4,000 pounds of ordnance, either bombs or depth charges, and torpedo racks were available for the type as well. The PBY entered service in 1936, and until World War II broke out, they participated in some training exercise. Actually, by 1939, the PBY was considered obsolete, and its planned successors, like the Martin XPBM Mariner, the Consolidated XPB-2Y Coronado, and the Sikorsky XPBS were already flying by the time the war broke out. But its production still continued, thanks to the large foreign orders Consolidated received from Britain, Canada, Australia, France, and others. Britain ordered 106 units, and deliveries began in November 1940, as Catalina I and II, depending on equipment. The name Catalina was given by the British after the resort island at the California coast, and in 1941 the US forces adopted the name as well. In December 1939, the US Navy also decided to order additional 200 units of the type, as its planned successors were not ready yet. When the PBY first saw combat, it was not a success, as it happened during the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, when almost all of them stationed there were destroyed on the ground. Only the ones flying patrol missions remained unharmed. The engagements in the war showed the vulnerability of the PBY early on. Many of them were lost because of the lack of self-sealing fuel tanks and armor plating. The bad design of the waist gunner positions on the early models didn't help either, as the guns were not belt-fed but used a 50-round canister, which was barely enough for 10 seconds of firing. This was only fixed on the later PBY-5 with the introduction of the new redesigned waist gunner positions. Despite the losses early on, later the PBY turned out to be a very versatile and useful addition to the Allied air power. They were used in anti-submarine role, as patrol aircraft, convoy escorts, search and rescue planes, and so on. Built by bigger numbers than any other flying boat, it was the most widely used type for these roles. They were used in the anti-submarine role both on the Pacific and on the Atlantic, and they sunk numerous submarines. Their role as a maritime patrol aircraft resulted in their participation in some of the most important and most well-known engagements of the war. In May 1941, it was one of these planes that located the German battleship Bismarck, as it tried to get away from the chasing Royal Navy. The PBY patrol plane spotted the Japanese fleet before the Battle of Midway in June 1942, giving the US forces the upper hand in the clash. But they were not only used as patrol aircraft. The plane's vulnerability was a big drawback in daytime missions, but the effective use of the radar on later models helped them become a good night attack aircraft. Maybe the most successful was the so-called Black Cat tactics, nighttime search and attack missions. These raids successfully attacked the Japanese supply shipments, moved under the darkness of the night. Some of these planes were modified for bigger firepower, like this model with dual 50 caliber machine guns installed in the nose, or another example featuring a 20mm cannon. Though it is not as well known, all PBYs were able to carry torpedoes as well, and they made good use of these in their attack missions. But maybe the most remembered role these planes were used in was the search and rescue operations. The missions codenamed Dumbo saved the lives of many airmen who were picked up from the ocean or from small islands during the war. Maybe the most famous of them was the PBY saving dozens of sailors after the sinking of the heavy cruiser Indianapolis, when they took on board as many men as it was possible and waited for the rescue ships. As the plane was so overloaded, it wouldn't have been able to fly. After World War II ended, the US Navy quickly retired the PBY as newer designs took its place. Only the amphibious version stayed active for some time, the last of them retiring in 1957. The type was used longer in other countries though. Many of them flew actively well into the 1970s. One of them was a participant in a Cold War incident, which was named after it. The so-called Catalina incident happened in 1952, when a Swedish Catalina was shot down by a Soviet MiG-15 fighter over the Baltic Sea. Many of the Catalinas were used for civilian purposes, some modified as firefighters, some built as flying yachts. Though this aircraft was considered obsolete even before World War II broke out, and seemed it will be retired soon, it not only served through the war in many roles, showing how versatile it was, but in many countries served for decades, and found new roles in civilian life as well. It deserved its fame as it performed in any role it was given. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Please leave a like, subscribe to my channel, and in the comments let me know if there's any interesting events or vehicles you'd like to see.